Everyone thought the millionaire, lying in the hospital bed, was completely unconscious. Machines beeped, hours passed, and decisions were made in whispers. But when his wife leaned close and murmured 5 calm words, meant only for silence, his breath caught. She never realized he heard everything. Before we begin, take a quiet moment with me. Wherever you're listening from, I hope this story finds you safe, grounded, and open. This channel exists because of people who still feel deeply, who listen closely, and who believe that stories can heal as much as they can reveal. If this space has ever made you feel understood, you're already part of this family. And if this is your first time here, welcome. You're not just watching a story. You're stepping into a place where hearts pay attention. If you believe that truth, even when whispered, still matters, leave a comment and let us know you're here. The first thing he noticed wasn't the pain. It was the silence that came after it, thick and deliberate, like the world had decided to hold its breath. Somewhere beyond the darkness, someone said his name, and that's when he understood he was still alive. And that silence? It was a choice. Rain streaked across shattered glass, crawling like veins over the windshield, as red and blue lights bled into the night. Metal groaned somewhere nearby, a tired, dying sound, while boots splashed through shallow puddles on the asphalt. He couldn't open his eyes, or rather, he didn't want to. His body felt distant, heavy, as if it belonged to someone else entirely. But his mind was sharp, alert in a way that surprised him. Every sound landed cleanly, painfully clear. "Sir, can you hear me?" A man asked, breathless, close to his face. He could, every word, every shift in tone. He heard the urgency masked by protocol, the quiet tension professionals carried when the patient mattered more than the average name on a chart. Someone else said it then, low but unmistakable. That's him. The millionaire. The word carried weight, changed the rhythm around him. Movements became faster, voices more careful. He almost smiled, or would have, if smiling hadn't required effort. The unconscious millionaire. That's what they thought he was. That's what he let them believe. A stretcher clicked open. Cold air brushed his cheek as they lifted him, rain giving way to the sterile scent of latex and antiseptic. His head lolled to the side, obedient, convincing. Inside, he was counting breaths, tracking footsteps, memorizing everything. Years in boardrooms had taught him the value of observation. Silence had always been his most effective tool. Blood pressures dropping, someone said. Pupils reactive, another replied. He might be hearing us. That sentence echoed longer than the sirens. Might be hearing us. He focused on not reacting, on keeping his breathing shallow and even. It occurred to him then, not for the first time in his life, that pretending was easier than explaining. Easier than facing the consequences waiting on the other side of consciousness. The ambulance doors slammed shut, sealing him into a cocoon of noise and motion. As the vehicle lurched forward, he drifted, not into sleep, but into memory. The accident replayed itself in fragments, the slick road, the glare of headlights. His own hands gripping the steering wheel too tightly, knuckles white with a frustration he hadn't been able to name. He remembered thinking about the argument from earlier that evening, the one that ended with silence instead of resolution. Fragile marriage, he'd thought bitterly, like everything else built to look solid from a distance. Family notified? A voice asked. Yes, wife's on her way. That did something to him. Not panic, not relief. Something colder, calculated. He let the darkness hold him tighter, welcomed it. Hospital silence was coming. He could already feel it, that strange quiet where truth slipped out because people believed they weren't being heard. The emergency room was chaos wrapped in order. Shoes squeaked against polished floors. Curtains were pulled back, then closed. Machines beeped, steady and indifferent. Someone cut his shirt away, scissors cold against his skin. He remained still through it all, the perfect patient, eyes shut, body limp. A doctor leaned over him, voice calm but edged with curiosity. "He's lucky," she said. Another inch, and this would have ended differently. Lucky. The word felt ironic. He wondered, briefly, if his wife would use it later. If she'd say how lucky they were, how close they came to losing everything. Or if she'd say nothing at all. They moved him again, into a quieter room. The beeping slowed, settled into a rhythm that felt like time itself being measured out. A nurse adjusted his fore, humming under her breath. He listened to her footsteps fade before allowing his thoughts to surface fully. This was the space between. The pause before the fallout. For the first time since the accident, he realized he didn't want to wake up. Not yet. Footsteps approached again, lighter this time. He recognized them before the door even opened. Her perfume reached him, subtle, familiar, wrong in this place. She didn't rush to his side. She stopped just inside the doorway, and he felt the distance between them like a physical thing. "Oh my God," she whispered, but there was no break in her voice. No collapse. She moved closer, her heels clicking softly, then stopped. He imagined her standing there, arms crossed or hands clasped too tightly, eyes scanning his face for signs of life, or perhaps for signs of release. He wondered which outcome she feared more. "They said you might hear me," she said after a moment, almost conversational. "But I don't think you can." There it was. The assumption. The opening. He felt her sit beside the bed, the mattress dipping slightly under her weight. Her hand hovered near his, hesitated, then rested on the sheet instead. Not touching him, not really. He counted the seconds between her breaths, the way he used to during negotiations, waiting for the other side to reveal more than they intended. "I don't even know what to say," she continued, quieter now. "This wasn't how I thought things would go. Things. Always vague. Always safe." A doctor poked her head in briefly, explained something about tests, observation, time. The wife nodded, thanked her, played her part flawlessly. As soon as the door closed again, her shoulders dropped, just a fraction. He caught it. He always did. "You look peaceful," she said, studying him. "Isn't that funny?" He almost laughed. Peaceful was the last word he'd used to describe himself. Beneath the stillness, his mind raced, connecting dots, replaying conversations from the past months. Hidden truth lived in the gaps between words, in the things she hadn't said during their last dinner, during the drive that ended in twisted metal and rain. She leaned closer, lowering her voice, as if the machines themselves might be listening. "They say familiar voices help," she murmured. "But I don't know if mine counts anymore." That hurt more than the impact ever could have, and she didn't even know it. Or maybe she did. He stayed still, breathing shallow, letting her believe what she wanted. The unconscious millionaire. The man who couldn't interrupt, couldn't argue, couldn't demand answers. After a while, she stood, smoothing her dress, reclaiming her composure. "I'll be back tomorrow," she said. "Rest." Her footsteps retreated, the door clicking shut behind her. The room felt emptier, colder. He let the moment stretch, then made a decision that would change everything. He would stay right where he was, wrapped in hospital silence, listening. Because whatever was coming next, he needed to hear it first. Morning arrived without ceremony, slipping into the room like an uninvited guest. There was no sunrise to greet, no warm glow, only the steady artificial light humming above him, and the soft, relentless rhythm of machines measuring a body that refused to speak. He lay exactly as he had been left, eyes closed, limbs heavy, breath controlled with care. Hospital silence wasn't empty. It was crowded with things people assumed didn't matter. A nurse entered quietly, her presence announced by the faint squeak of rubber saws and the whisper of fabric. She checked the monitors first, not his face, as if the machines were more reliable witnesses than the man beneath them. He listened to her hum, off-key but gentle, and to the way she spoke his name out loud, testing it in the air. "Good morning," she said, though it felt like a courtesy rather than a fact. "Your vitals are stable. No changes overnight." She adjusted the 4, her fingers cool and efficient. He noted the way her touch never lingered, how she'd learned not to expect anything back. When she finished, she glanced at the door. "Your wife called earlier," she added. "She said she'd be here soon." Wife. The word settled into him differently now, heavier, like a title that had expired, but was still being used out of habit. When the nurse left, the quiet expanded. It gave him room to think, and thinking was dangerous. His mind wandered through fragments of their life together, scenes uninvited but vivid. A kitchen table where contracts once replaced dinner plates. The bedroom where conversations died halfway through sentences. The way success had crept between them slowly, politely, until it occupied every space where intimacy used to live. The door opened again. He recognized her immediately, not by sight, but by the way the air shifted when she entered. She always carried herself like she expected resistance, like she was bracing for an argument that might never come. She paused just inside the doorway, long enough to take in the room, the machines, the body that looked familiar but felt distant. "You can go," she said to someone behind her. Papers rustled. A man murmured something formal and left. The click of the door sounded louder after that. She approached the bed slowly, pulling the chair closer. This time, she didn't hesitate before sitting. Her perfume was lighter than usual, almost citrus, unfamiliar. He wondered if she'd chosen it deliberately, or if it was simply part of a life he no longer recognized. "They keep asking me questions," she said, exhaling sharply. "Doctors, administrators. Everyone wants answers like I have them." She laughed once, short and humorless. "As if we ever agreed on anything." Her eyes traced his face, searching for signs, for reassurance or permission. He remained still, letting her study him like a problem she hadn't solved yet. "They say you might be able to hear me," she continued. "I don't know if that's worse or better." She reached out, then stopped herself, her hand hovering above the sheet before retreating. That small hesitation said more than any confession could have. Fragile marriage, measured now in inches of distance. A doctor came in briefly, explaining test results, prognosis, timeframes. She nodded, absorbing information like a checklist. When the doctor mentioned that familiar voices sometimes helped, her mouth tightened. "I'll talk to him," she said. "Of course." As soon as they were alone again, she leaned closer, lowering her voice. "They think I should talk about us," she said, as if the machines might judge her. "I don't even know where to start." She did start, though, with safe memories, early years. The first apartment. The nights he worked late and promised it would only be temporary. She spoke as if narrating someone else's life, distant, controlled. He listened for what she left out, and there was plenty. "You always wanted more," she said. And I admired that. I really did. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, frowned, and turned it face down on the chair beside her. He memorized the sound, the tension it added to her posture. "I don't regret everything," she went on. "But sometimes I wonder who we'd be if you'd stop chasing for just a second." That landed harder than she intended. He'd spent years believing ambition justified all collateral damage. Hearing it framed as loss, even quietly, unsettled him. She stood suddenly, pacing once before catching herself. "I shouldn't say this now," she muttered. "You can't even answer." Exactly, he thought. Silence made people reckless. She sat again, this time closer. "If you can hear me," she said softly, "you should wake up. We have things to figure out." Things, always things. She stayed longer than before, filling the room with stories, complaints, half-truths. He sensed exhaustion beneath her words. Not grief, but something sharper, more impatient. When she finally left, the room felt colder. The afternoon blurred. Nurses came and went. The light shifted imperceptibly behind the curtains. He heard staff talk freely near his bed, speculating about outcomes, about money, about how patients like him sometimes lingered longer than expected. The unconscious millionaire became a curiosity, a topic whispered over charts. Late in the day, she returned, alone again. No paperwork this time, no formal tone. She looked tired, her composure thinning at the edges. "I didn't think this would be so hard," she admitted, sitting down, "talking to someone who won't interrupt me." That honesty surprised them both. She sighed, rubbing her temples. "I used to think silence was peaceful," she said. "Now it just feels like pressure." She talked about sacrifices she felt she'd made, opportunities she'd set aside. The resentment surfaced in small doses, carefully managed but unmistakable. He felt each word lodge somewhere inside him, reshaping old assumptions. "I loved you," she said finally, quieter. "I don't know when that stopped being enough." Her voice cracked then, just slightly. Not enough to break, but enough to reveal something raw. He stayed still, heart pounding against his ribs, fighting the instinct to react. After she left, he lay alone with the machines and his thoughts. Hospital silence settled back into place, familiar now, almost comforting. He understood then that every visit peeled back another layer, that whatever truth she carried was getting closer to the surface. And he would be ready when it did. Before we go any further, let me ask you something. If you were lying there, unable to move, listening to the person you trusted most make choices for your life, what would you do? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Rate the story so far from 0 to 10, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support helps keep these stories coming. The third day blurred into the second, so seamlessly that time stopped feeling linear. It became a loop of beeping machines, hushed footsteps, and the slow erosion of assumptions. He stayed where he was, eyes closed, body compliant, mind wide awake. Silence, he was learning, didn't just protect secrets. It invited them. The morning nurse was different this time, brisk and efficient, her voice clipped as she read from the chart. She spoke to him as if he were a task, not a person, and oddly, he preferred it. Professional distance was honest in its own way. She adjusted the monitor, frowned slightly, then nodded to herself. No spontaneous response, she said to no one in particular. Still unresponsive. Unresponsive again. He catalogued the word, filed it away. If only she knew how responsive he truly was, how every sound etched itself into his awareness. When his wife arrived later that morning, she didn't hesitate in the doorway anymore. She walked straight in, confident now, as if familiarity had returned in his inability to challenge her. She wore a tailored coat, sharp lines, hair perfectly arranged. No sign of sleepless nights or worry. He wondered when concern had stopped being part of the costume. "You look the same," she said, sitting down. "That's good, right?" She didn't wait for an answer. She never did anymore. She pulled out her phone and checked something quickly before placing it face down again. This time, she didn't silence it. It buzzed once, twice, each vibration sending a ripple of tension through her posture. He noted the timing, the way she glanced at the door instinctively afterward. "They moved you to a quieter wing," she said. "Less foot traffic, more privacy." Privacy. The word lingered. Hospital silence thickened around them, and he realized how much that privacy emboldened her. Without an audience, without witnesses, her words loosened. "I spoke to the doctors," she continued. "They say these things take time. That sometimes people wake up when they're ready." She smiled faintly, but there was something calculating beneath it. "I suppose that makes sense." You were never one to rush decisions. That stung, not because it was untrue, but because of how she framed it, like a flaw, like justification. She leaned back, crossing her legs. I've been doing a lot of thinking, she said. About us, about everything. He braced himself internally, recognizing the cadence. This wasn't reflection. This was preparation. I don't know if you remember, she went on, but we talked once about what would happen if one of us couldn't speak for ourselves. He remembered. A late night, wine untouched. A hypothetical that felt distant at the time. You said you trusted me, she added. You said I'd know what to do. Her voice softened deliberately. He heard the careful shaping of the sentence, the way she wrapped it in sentiment. Hidden truth often arrived wearing familiar clothes. Another buzz from her phone. This time she glanced at it, frowned, then stood, pacing a few steps before sitting again. Her composure slipped just enough to reveal impatience beneath the calm. They're asking about long-term plans, she said. About contingencies. There it was. Legal language creeping in again. He imagined documents, signatures, decisions being discussed somewhere beyond these walls. I told them we'd wait, she added quickly. That we're not there yet. Not there yet. He wondered where she thought they were. She sighed, rubbing her hands together. I didn't think this would be so complicated. He almost laughed. Complicated was what she called it, when things didn't bend immediately to her expectations. She stayed longer than usual that day, filling the space with conversation that circled the same points from different angles. She talked about the house, about adjustments she'd made while he was here. She mentioned meetings, names he recognized, alliances he'd assumed were solid. Each detail felt like a piece sliding into place, revealing a picture he hadn't wanted to see. At one point, she leaned closer, lowering her voice. They say talking helps, she murmured, even if you can't answer. Her eyes searched his face, lingering on his mouth, his brow. He focused on his breathing, on maintaining the illusion. The unconscious millionaire. Safe. Silent. I need you to understand something, she said quietly. Whatever happens next, I tried. Tried. The word felt incomplete. When she left that afternoon, the silence pressed in harder than before. He replayed her words, parsing tone and timing. Silence allowed people to rewrite history in real time. It allowed justification to masquerade as truth. That evening, 2 nurses spoke near his bed while adjusting equipment. They didn't realize how clearly their voices carried. She's here a lot, one said. The wife. Yeah, the other replied. But she doesn't cry. No, the first agreed. She asks questions. Important ones. That confirmed what he already suspected. Grief looked different on everyone, but calculation had its own signature. The next visit came late, well past normal hours. The lights were lower, the hallway quieter. When she entered, she closed the door behind her deliberately. That alone set his nerves on edge. I didn't think I'd come back tonight, she said, almost to herself. But I needed to. She sat without removing her coat, tension radiating from her. I had a conversation today, she continued. One I wasn't planning on having yet. His heart rate spiked slightly, enough that the monitor reacted. She noticed, leaning forward. Huh, she murmured. That's interesting. She watched the screen for a moment, then dismissed it. Probably nothing. Probably. She smiled thinly. I just wanted to say, whatever you hear, whatever you think you know, remember that things aren't always what they seem. The irony nearly broke him. She stood, hesitated, then leaned down, close enough that he could feel her breath against his ear. We're all just doing what we have to do, she whispered. As she pulled away, he understood something with terrifying clarity. Silence wasn't just giving him access to her truth. It was giving her permission to act. And whatever she was preparing for, it was already in motion. By the fourth day, the room no longer felt like a place of healing. It felt like a waiting room for decisions already made somewhere else. He lay beneath the thin blanket, listening to the familiar chorus of machines, aware now of how each sound had begun to carry meaning. The monitors were steady, almost reassuring, but the silence between visits had grown heavier, as if it were pressing down on him, daring him to break it. A doctor came early that morning, accompanied by a resident whose shoes squeaked nervously with every step. They spoke at the foot of the bed, their voices low but clear enough for him to catch every word. They discussed neurological responses, reflexes, timelines. One of them mentioned the possibility that his condition might be partly psychological, that sometimes the mind resisted waking even when the body could. The idea settled uncomfortably close to the truth. When they left, the door clicked shut with finality. He focused on his breathing, steadying himself. He knew the silence was starting to work both ways. It was giving him insight, yes, but it was also isolating him, trapping him inside his own head. The weight of unsaid things accumulated quickly when there was no outlet. His wife arrived just before noon. He could tell immediately that something had shifted. Her movements were slower, her posture less rigid. She looked tired in a way that couldn't be fixed with sleep. She sat down without a word, exhaling deeply as if she'd been holding her breath all the way down the hallway. "They asked me if I wanted to bring in a counselor," she said finally. "For me, not you." She gave a small, humorless smile. I didn't know how to answer that. She leaned back, eyes drifting to the window where the light barely filtered through. "Everyone keeps telling me to take care of myself. Like that's the hardest part." Her voice carried less edge today, more weariness. He listened closely, aware that vulnerability could be just another form of deflection, but also that it sometimes revealed more than anger ever could. "I didn't plan for this," she said. "None of it." She glanced at him then, studying his stillness. "I know people think I'm cold, that I'm being practical." She paused, fingers twisting together. "But do you know how exhausting it is to be the one who always has to be practical?" That was new. He'd always assumed practicality was her armor, something she wore easily. Hearing it framed as a burden unsettled him. She stood, walked to the window, then back again, restless. "They keep asking me about quality of life," she continued. "About what you'd want if things stayed like this." His chest tightened slightly, the monitor responding with a subtle change. She noticed again, her eyes narrowing briefly. "Interesting," she murmured, then shook her head. "Probably coincidence." She sat down again, closer this time. "I don't want you to think I didn't care," she said quietly, "because I did. I do." Her emphasis on the present tense felt forced, as if she were convincing herself as much as him. The fragile marriage she spoke of had fractures deeper than either of them had admitted. She talked then about regrets, but not the obvious ones. Not infidelity, not betrayal. She spoke instead about invisibility, about feeling like a supporting character in a life that had outgrown her. About how success had turned into a language she no longer spoke fluently. "I used to feel important," she said. "Not because of the money. Because you needed me." That cut deeper than accusation ever could. He remembered relying on her instincts early on, trusting her judgment implicitly. Somewhere along the way, he'd replaced that trust with control. A nurse interrupted briefly to check his vitals. The wife fell silent immediately, her expression smoothing back into polite concern. The shift was automatic, practiced. When the nurse left, the tension returned, thicker than before. "I shouldn't be saying all this," she said. "It's not fair." "You can't respond." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "That's the irony, isn't it? The first time I say exactly what I think, and you're not here to argue." He felt the urge to open his eyes, to challenge her version of events, to remind her of things she was conveniently skipping over. But he stayed still. He needed to hear the rest. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. "I don't hate you," she said. "I don't even blame you. I just... Stop waiting. Stop waiting." The words echoed loudly in his mind. Waiting for what? For him to change? To notice? To come back? Her phone buzzed again, and this time she didn't ignore it. She checked the message, her jaw tightening. She typed a quick response, then set the phone aside. "Things are moving faster than I expected," she admitted, almost under her breath. "I thought I'd have more time." That was the most revealing thing she'd said yet. Time was running out, but not for him. She stood abruptly, pacing once, then twice, as if trying to burn off nervous energy. "I need to be honest," she said finally, stopping at the foot of the bed. "About things I never said." She took a deep breath. "I resented you," she confessed. "Not because you succeeded, but because you stopped seeing me." There was no anger in her voice now, only exhaustion. The truth, when it came, was quieter than he'd imagined. "I stayed because it was easier than starting over," she continued. "Because leaving felt like failure." She looked down at him, eyes searching his face. "And now look at us." The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything left unresolved. She wiped at her eyes, surprised by the moisture there, then straightened her shoulders. "I'll come back later," she said. "I need to think." As she left, he lay alone with her words echoing in his mind. The weight of unsaid things pressed down harder than ever. He realized that silence was no longer neutral ground. It was becoming dangerous, because the longer he stayed silent, the more she filled that space with her own justifications. And somewhere beneath all that honesty, something darker was still waiting to be said. By the fifth day, the hospital no longer felt neutral. It felt complicit. The walls held on to whispers. The corners remembered conversations that were never meant to linger. He lay still beneath the thin blanket, but his awareness had sharpened into something almost uncomfortable, like a nerve exposed. Silence had served him well so far, but now it was beginning to hum with tension, vibrating with things that refused to stay hidden. The morning passed quietly, too quietly. No early visit, no polite check-in. Nurses moved in and out, efficient and detached, speaking in coded language over his chart. He caught phrases like long-term observation and limited responsiveness. One of them mentioned the possibility of reducing sedation soon, testing for voluntary movement. The idea made his pulse quicken, just enough for the monitor to register it. He forced himself to slow down, to stay buried. Late afternoon brought her back. He knew it was her before she spoke. The air changed again, heavier, more deliberate. She closed the door behind her, a small action that sent a clear message. This visit wasn't for appearances. "You're sleeping a lot," she said, standing near the bed. "Or at least, you look like you are." She didn't sit right away. She stood there, arms folded, studying him with an intensity she hadn't shown before. Not searching for signs of life, but for something else. Resolve, maybe? Permission. "They said I could come after hours," she continued. "Less interruptions." Hospital silence thickened, wrapping itself around them. This was the quiet that allowed people to say things they'd rehearsed for years. She finally sat down, exhaling sharply. "I've been honest with you," she said. "At least I think I have." Her tone was calm, but he could hear the strain beneath it. The mask was starting to slip. "I've talked about how I felt invisible, about resentment, regret." She shook her head. "But there's more." There it was. He focused on every syllable, every pause. "I didn't plan on saying this," she admitted. "Not like this. But you're not exactly giving me feedback." She gave a faint, brittle smile. "So here it is." She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, voice lowering instinctively. "I was tired of waiting for you to choose me." The words landed hard, heavier than accusation. He remembered moments she might be referring to. Dinners postponed, trips canceled, conversations delayed indefinitely. I told myself it was fine, she went on, that this was just a phase, that eventually you'd slow down. She laughed quietly, without humor. You never did. Her phone buzzed again. She ignored it this time, leaving it face down. Whatever waited on the other end could wait a little longer. I stopped being your priority, she said, and somewhere along the way, I stopped making you mine. That confession hovered between them, fragile and dangerous. He sensed she was circling something bigger, something she hadn't quite committed to saying out loud yet. You always assumed I'd be there, she continued. That no matter what happened, I'd hold the line. Her fingers tightened together. I didn't think you'd notice if I didn't. The monitor beeped steadily, indifferent to the emotional unraveling happening inches away. I made choices, she said softly, on my own. That was new. And telling. He felt a surge of adrenaline, fought it down. This was the edge he'd been waiting for, the place where truth began to bleed through justification. She stood suddenly, pacing once, then stopping. I don't want you to misunderstand me, she said. This isn't about punishment. She turned back to him, eyes sharp now. It's about reality. Reality, as she defined it. I couldn't keep living in limbo, she went on, always waiting for you to be present, to see me. Her voice wavered slightly, but she pushed through. So I stopped waiting. The repetition sent a chill through him. Stopped waiting meant acting. She sat again, closer than before. Close enough that he could feel the warmth of her body, the faint tremor in her hands. They say people in your condition can hear everything, she murmured, even if they can't respond. She leaned in, her voice dropping even further. If that's true, then you deserve to hear this. His heart hammered against his ribs. He concentrated on keeping his breathing shallow even. I didn't just feel lonely, she said. I felt trapped. There it was. The pivot. Trapped in a life that looked perfect from the outside, she continued, but felt empty on the inside. She pulled back slightly, studying his face again. I don't think you ever meant to do that to me. It almost sounded like forgiveness. Almost. But intentions don't change outcomes, she added. Silence stretched. She seemed to be gauging something, building courage. I don't know how this will end, she said. For us. For you. She glanced briefly at the machines, then back at him. But I need you to know that whatever happens next, it didn't come out of nowhere. The implication was unmistakable. This wasn't a reaction. It was a plan. She stood again, smoothing her clothes, reassembling her composure piece by piece. The mask slid back into place, but not perfectly. Cracks remained. I'll be back later, she said. I just needed to say that. She paused at the door, hand on the handle. Rest, she added, the word carrying a different weight now. When she left, the room felt colder, sharper. He lay there, pulse racing, replaying every word. The quiet revenge she hadn't named outright was already unfolding. Silence had given her space to act, to justify, to move pieces without resistance. He understood now that he was no longer just listening to her unravel. He was listening to the aftermath of decisions already made. And whatever she was preparing to say next, whatever she believed he would never hear, was getting closer. The mask had slipped, and beneath it, something dangerous had finally shown itself. The night came down slowly, like a lid closing. The hallway outside his room grew quieter with each passing hour, footsteps thinning until they were replaced by the distant murmur of voices at the nurse's station and the occasional rattle of a cart rolling by. Inside, the lights were dimmed to a soft glow that flattened shadows and made everything feel unreal. He lay still, eyes closed, breath measured, every nerve alert. He knew she would come. He could feel it in the air, in the way the silence seemed to hold its shape, waiting. When the door finally opened, it did so without hesitation. She didn't pause this time. She stepped inside and closed it behind her, the click of the latch sounding louder than it should have. No one else followed. No papers, no polite smiles. Just her. "You're alone," she said quietly, as if confirming it for herself. She stood there for a moment, not approaching the bed right away. He sensed her watching him, studying the rise and fall of his chest, the stillness of his face. There was something different about her energy tonight, less guarded, less performative, almost resolved. "I asked them not to come in," she continued. "Just for a few minutes." She moved closer, pulling the chair up beside the bed, but she didn't sit. Instead, she leaned forward, hands resting on the mattress, bringing her face closer to his. He could smell her perfume again, that lighter scent she'd chosen recently. It felt deliberate now, like everything else. "I've been thinking about what I said earlier," she murmured. "About choices. About stopping waiting." Her voice was calm, almost soothing. That calmness unsettled him, more than anger ever could. "I don't want you to think this is about cruelty," she said. "It's not." She straightened slightly, and finally sat down. The chair creaked softly under her weight. "It's about honesty." The word landed heavily. Honesty had always been their battlefield. "I spent a long time telling myself that silence was safer," she went on. "That if I didn't say certain things out loud, they wouldn't become real." She laughed quietly, shaking her head. "Turns out, silence just gives you room to plan." There it was again. Plan. He felt his heart rate climb, fought to keep it steady. The monitor responded with a faint change in rhythm. She noticed, her eyes flicking to the screen. "Huh," she said softly. "You always did react when things got interesting." She leaned closer, lowering her voice instinctively. "Don't worry," she added. "I'm not reading into it. Not reading into it." He almost smiled at the irony. She reached out then, finally taking his hand. Her grip was firm, grounding, not affectionate, intentional. "I don't know if you can hear me," she said, "but I'm going to talk anyway." She squeezed his hand once, and released it, as if bracing herself. "I used to rehearse conversations in my head," she admitted. "Things I wanted to say to you. Arguments, confessions." Her gaze drifted to the window, to the faint outline of the city beyond. "Most of the time, I never said them. There was always a better moment, or a worse one." She looked back at him. "Now there's only this." She leaned in closer still, until her mouth was near his ear. Her voice dropped to a whisper, not out of fear of being overheard, but because whispering made it feel more final. "I need you to understand something," she said softly. "I'm not waiting for you to wake up." The words slid into him like ice. He forced himself not to react, not to flinch. "I can't," she continued. "I made peace with that days ago." She paused, letting that settle. The room felt suddenly smaller, the air heavier. "They asked me today what I would do if you never did," she went on. "Wake up, I mean." She inhaled slowly. "I gave them an answer." His pulse spiked again. He fought it down, every muscle in his body tense with restraint. "I told them I'd do what you would have wanted," she whispered. "I told them I'd protect what we built." Protected. Another word that carried too many meanings. She pulled back just enough to look at his face, searching for something. Finding nothing, she nodded to herself. "You always said you trusted me," she murmured. "That I knew how to make the hard calls." She leaned in again, closer than before, her lips almost brushing his ear. Her voice was barely audible now, but every word cut through the silence with surgical precision. "I've already started letting go," she whispered. His breath caught, just for a fraction of a second. He recovered quickly, but the damage was done. Those 5 words echoed louder than any shouted accusation ever could have. Letting go. Not planning to. Not thinking about it. Already started. She stayed there for a moment, her face close, her presence overwhelming. Then she straightened, smoothing her hair, reassembling herself. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said quietly. "But I needed to say that." She stood, adjusting her coat. "I'll be back tomorrow," she added. "We'll see how things are then." At the door, she paused, her hand resting on the handle. "Rest," she said again, the word now stripped of any tenderness it once held. When she left, the door clicked shut with a finality that sent a chill through him. He lay there in the dim light, heart pounding, mind racing. The whisper replayed itself over and over, each repetition revealing new implications. She wasn't waiting. She wasn't hoping. She was moving on, actively, deliberately, under the assumption that he was already gone. In that moment, he understood with brutal clarity that pretending to be unconscious was no longer just a strategy. It was a risk. And if he stayed silent much longer, the truth he'd uncovered might arrive too late to stop what was already in motion. The night after the whisper refused to end. It stretched and folded in on itself, each minute dragging behind it the weight of everything he now knew. The ceiling above him looked unfamiliar, distorted by dim light and exhaustion, but he didn't close his eyes. He didn't dare. Sleep felt dangerous now, like surrender. Silence had stopped being a shield and had turned into a ticking clock. Her words replayed again and again, not just the 5 she'd whispered, but the ones surrounding them, the pauses, the certainty in her tone. Already started letting go. That wasn't grief. That wasn't confusion. That was action. That was a door already halfway shut. He focused on the machines, on the steady beeping that marked time more honestly than any watch ever had. His heart rate wanted to climb, to betray him, but he forced it down through sheer discipline. He had trained himself for this kind of control long before hospitals and accidents. Boardrooms had taught him how to remain still while everything shifted beneath the table. Morning arrived quietly, announced only by the subtle change in hallway noise and the soft glow of artificial light brightening the room. A nurse entered, checked his vitals, and lingered a second longer than usual. He felt her fingers on his wrist, her thumb pressing gently. She murmured. "That's interesting," she didn't explain. She adjusted the chart and left, her expression thoughtful. He filed the moment away. Every reaction mattered now. 2 voices drifted in from the hallway later, unguarded, assuming he was beyond hearing anything useful. "There's more variability," one said. "Heart rate, breathing. He might be more aware than we think. Or it could be stress responses," another replied. "Still, we should flag it." Flag it? He almost smiled internally. Let them notice. Just not enough. His wife didn't come that morning. The absence settled into the room like a deliberate choice. He counted the hours without her voice, without her presence filling the space. In the quiet, he reconstructed everything she'd said over the past days, lining it up like evidence. Her careful language, the legal undertones, the way she spoke about the future without including him in it. By early afternoon, doctors came in together, their tone different now, more focused. They discussed adjustments, responsiveness, the possibility of increased awareness. One of them referenced consent again, mentioning that the wife had already approved several procedural decisions. Approved. The word tightened something in his chest. "She's been very clear," the doctor said. Prepared. Prepared. He knew exactly what that meant. She wasn't reacting to uncertainty. She was managing it. After they left, he allowed himself a single, controlled change in behavior. A slightly deeper breath when the door closed. A faint tightening of his jaw. Nothing dramatic. Just enough. The monitor responded, blinking softly. Somewhere down the hall, someone would notice. Late afternoon slipped toward evening before she finally returned. He recognized her steps immediately, slower, measured. She wasn't rushing anymore. She entered the room with the calm of someone who believed the hardest part was already behind her. "You've had a full day," she said lightly, sitting down. "I got updates." She didn't ask how he was. She didn't pretend to. Her focus was elsewhere now. "They're optimistic," she continued, cautiously. She watched the monitor as she spoke, her eyes flicking to the numbers, then back to his face. He stayed still, let her think she was reading a blank page. "I've been making arrangements," she said. "Nothing permanent. Just responsible. Responsible." The word had always been her favorite shield. She talked about managing affairs, about conversations she'd had with people he trusted. She mentioned stability, continuity, reassurance. Not once did she mention waiting. "I don't know how long this will last," she said. "Your recovery." She hesitated, just briefly. "But I can't freeze everything indefinitely." There it was, the quiet justification. Life doesn't pause forever, she'd said before. Now she was living by it. He listened, absorbing names, timelines, intentions. She spoke more freely now, convinced that silence equaled absence. That assumption was her mistake. "I hope you'd understand," she added. If you could. If you could." Past tense applied to a man still breathing. When she left, something settled inside him with finality. The strategy had shifted. Listening alone was no longer enough. Information without action was just regret waiting to happen. That night, he didn't sleep at all. He planned. Not emotionally, not impulsively, methodically. He thought about leverage, about witnesses, about timing. Waking up wasn't just a physical act anymore. It was a statement. And statements needed the right audience. The next day, he began to push the boundary carefully. A deliberate shift in posture when nurses adjusted his sheets. A controlled change in breathing when certain words were spoken. Enough to raise questions, not alarms, the staff noticed. Conversations grew quieter, more deliberate around him. His wife noticed too. Her visits became shorter, her tone more guarded. She watched him now, really watched him, as if searching for cracks in a facade she'd believed solid. Silence, once her advantage, was starting to feel unstable. One afternoon, a nurse leaned close while checking his IV. "You're not as far gone as they think," she whispered, barely audible. "I've seen this before." He wanted to answer her. The urge was almost overwhelming. But he didn't. He held the line. That evening, as the lights dimmed again, he made the final decision. Tomorrow. Not because he couldn't wait any longer, but because waiting longer would cost him control. He would wake up when it mattered, when the truth he'd gathered could no longer be dismissed or rewritten. He lay there, eyes closed, fully awake, no longer a passive listener, but an active participant in his own survival. Silence had taught him everything he needed to know. Now it was time to use it. Morning arrived without ceremony, but it carried a different weight than all the mornings before it. The light behind the curtains was the same pale imitation of dawn. The machines still hummed with their steady, mechanical patience, yet something fundamental had shifted inside him. The silence no longer felt like a hiding place. It felt finished, used up. He lay there for a long moment, breathing slowly, grounding himself in the reality of the decision he had already made. There would be no more listening from the shadows. No more letting the world move around him, as if he were already gone. When the nurse entered, she did so the way they always did, careful and efficient. Her attention split between the monitors and the chart in her hands. She greeted him softly, out of habit more than hope, and reached for the 4. He waited. He waited until she was close enough to see his face clearly, until there would be no doubt, no room for misinterpretation. Then, with deliberate calm, he opened his eyes. The reaction was immediate and unfiltered. She froze, fingers tightening instinctively around the tubing, her breath catching so sharply it was almost painful to hear. Her eyes widened, darting from his face to the monitor and back again, as if the machines might contradict what she was seeing. "Oh," she whispered, voice trembling. "Oh, you're awake." He blinked once, slowly, letting his gaze settle on her. The room felt suddenly too small, too fragile to contain the moment. His throat burned as he tested it, the muscles unfamiliar after days of disuse. He swallowed, steadying himself. "Good morning," he said, his voice rough but undeniably present. The nurse stumbled backward, nearly colliding with the cart as she fumbled for the call button. "He's awake," she said urgently into the hallway. "He's responsive." Within moments, the room filled with movement and sound. Doctors appeared, questions overlapping, hands checking reflexes, lights shining briefly into his eyes. He answered slowly, carefully, choosing clarity over speed. He could feel their surprise shifting into cautious optimism, then into something closer to awe. They hadn't expected this. Not now. Not like this. And then he heard her. Her footsteps were unmistakable, sharp and fast, cutting through the corridor with urgency. She entered the room already speaking, already halfway through a sentence meant for someone else. She stopped the moment she saw him. Truly saw him. Sitting slightly upright, eyes open, focused. For a fraction of a second, there was no mask. The color drained from her face, then rushed back in a flush that betrayed her shock. Her mouth opened, then closed, calculations flickering rapidly behind her eyes. She recovered quickly, of course, smoothing her expression into something resembling relief. "You're awake," she said, breathless. "You scared me." He watched her without blinking, taking in the tension she couldn't quite hide, the stiffness in her posture. "I imagine I did," he replied calmly. The doctors exchanged glances before one of them cleared his throat. "We'll give you two some privacy," he said gently. "Press the button if you need anything." They left, the door closing softly behind them, sealing the room in a silence far heavier than the one he had endured before. This silence wasn't ignorance. It was awareness. She sat down slowly, cautiously, as if approaching something unpredictable. "How long?" she asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. He let the question hang between them, forcing her to sit with it. "Long enough," he said finally. "Long enough to hear things people don't say when they know they're being heard." Her jaw tightened. "That's not fair," she said. "I thought—" "You thought I was gone," he interrupted, his tone even. "You thought I couldn't listen." Her eyes dropped to her hands. "I was scared," she said. "Anyone would have been." "I know," he replied. "Fear makes people honest and careless." She looked up at him then, eyes glassy, searching. "How much did you hear?" He held her gaze. "Enough to understand what you were doing. Enough to understand why." She inhaled sharply, shoulders slumping as if a weight had finally been set down. "I didn't want it to happen like this," she said. "I didn't want to hurt you." "I don't think you did," he said, "but intention doesn't erase consequence." Silence stretched between them. Different now. No longer a weapon. No longer a shield. Just space where truth had nowhere left to hide. "I told myself you wouldn't wake up," she admitted quietly. "It made everything simpler." He nodded. "I figured." She laughed softly, bitterly. "You always did hate simple answers." He allowed himself a faint smile. Only when they weren't true. Her composure finally broke then, not into tears, but into something more raw, relief, exhaustion, the release of a story she'd been telling herself for days, maybe years. "I didn't plan to betray you," she said. "I planned to survive." He absorbed that, weighing it carefully. "So did I," he said. "We just chose different methods." They talked longer than either of them expected, not arguing, not defending, just laying things out plainly, stripped of performance. He spoke about what he'd heard, about the moments that changed his understanding. She spoke about loneliness, about resentment, about the slow erosion of something neither of them had protected well enough. When she finally stood to leave, it was without theatrics. No promises, no threats. Just a quiet acknowledgement of what was ending and what could never be reclaimed. "I'm glad you woke up," she said softly at the door, "even if it changes everything." "It already had," he replied. "I just needed my voice back to say it out loud." After she left, the room felt lighter. Not empty, lighter. A nurse returned, smiling with genuine warmth, asking how he felt. "Tired," he said. Then, after a pause, but clear, as the day unfolded, sunlight finally broke through the curtains in thin, honest lines, touching the floor, the walls, the bed where he lay no longer hiding. He listened to the sounds of the hospital around him, to life continuing, unpaused, unafraid. He had learned something expensive in the silence, something that couldn't be taught any other way. Truth didn't need volume to be powerful. It only needed to be heard.